Welcome to the HMO Matters podcast. And today I am going to be speaking to Matt Smith of Inspire Home Automation. Now, Inspire systems have been an integral part of my HMO business for about 5 or 6 years. And they've given us an absolute essential way of controlling our heating and hot water costs. So I thought it'd be a great idea to bring one of the directors of Inspire onto this podcast to have a chat. So I'd like to introduce you to Matt Smith. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Grant.
Matt, perhaps you could start by giving us a brief introduction to your company and what you guys do.
Yeah, no problem. So obviously, Matthew Smith, and I'm one of the directors of Inspire Home Automation. So we are primarily, we manufacture, design and sell smart heating controls. So allowing you to control your heating and hot water remotely. You don't need to be at the property. Where we perhaps differ slightly is we have a number of specific thermostats designed for certain sectors, one of which is typically HMO landlords. Other ones include holiday rentals, serviced accommodation. So we have some models specifically designed for certain sort of needs.
Okay, great. So my experience when I first started, I set up my first HMO, I think it was 7 years ago. And one of our bad bugs was typically a tenant taking a day off, turning the heating on, which you'd want them to do because they want to keep warm. But then, of course, we're paying the bills. They're not paying the bills. So there's no incentive for them to necessarily remember to turn it off. So we were suddenly getting meter readings and bills, which were kind of surprising us somewhat. So I needed to rummage around for a solution. Now, I think to be very honest, before I knew about you guys, we put in a thermostat product which helped us somewhat because it gave us some control, but it also gave the tenant control. So ultimately, if the tenant turned the heating on and we then turned it off again, they could then turn it on again. And the emphasis was on us to then remember to turn it off. And of course, we couldn't always do that. So it didn't really give us, it part solved our problem, but didn't really solve our problem. Then I did a little bit of research. By this point, I had joined some HMO specific Facebook groups and what have you. And Inspire Home Automation came up quite a lot as a good recommendation, in particular for HMO landlords, because basically it takes the control away from the tenant and gives it to the landlord. So basically everything is controlled by the landlord and the tenant has some limited control. So that was really for us, that was the main benefit of your system. So I just wanted to ask you, Matt, just to delve into that a little bit more and just go into a little bit more detail as to how your systems can help an HMO landlord with that functionality.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we had the exact same problem when we first started. We actually didn't focus this on the landlords initially. It's more for a residential side of things, and the landlords essentially contacted us very quickly when we first launched, saying it's great, but my tenants keep turning heating off again, or turning heating on, and I have to turn it off. And it was essentially 5 seconds for them to turn heating up and about 5 minutes for them to turn it back down again. So it was a losing battle. And the beauty of what we do is because everything we do is in-house, the design, the software, the phone apps, everything is all done by ourselves. So we're able to very quickly come up with, working with the landlords who contacted us with a version which was designed for them. So the key features they wanted was they didn't want to freeze the tenants, obviously, because they would then put electric heaters in or all sorts of other things which you really do not want. So it's a way of providing a sort of fair heating to the tenants, so they still have it on mornings and evenings when they're expected to be home, and they can then bring the heating on when they're cold. So if they're working at home one day, they can just bring it on with a boost or some limited functionality. And there's a few ways of doing that, but typically it wouldn't stay on. So if they then went out, which is perfectly reasonable. The heating wouldn't stay on. It would just switch off after they've gone out. So it might come on for an hour or something, depending on whatever you set. It's all fully settable by the landlord themselves. And that way the tenants can still bring heating when they need it, and it doesn't remain on for the whole day.
Yeah, I'm just picking up on one of the points that you just mentioned. So I don't think it's in anybody's interest to deprive our tenants of warmth or being comfortable. But as you correctly alluded to, it is just about having that control. So if they switch something on, it is for a finite period of time, which can be predetermined. So one of the things we do is, I think we've got our system set to 2 hours. So basically, if a tenant's at home, it's very cold outside and the tenant's working from home, they press a button, it gives them heating for 2 hours. That's probably going to last more like 4 or 5 hours, because once the heating comes off, the heat still remains. And if they want it again, they can turn it on again. So absolutely, our tenant community are able to feel comfortable, and they're able to draw on the heating or hot water whenever they want it. But it just prevents a situation of it being ongoing for periods of time when it really isn't needed. So that to us is really important. And since we started using these types of systems, we noticed a sizable reduction in our utility costs. But equally as importantly, our tenants were keeping warm, and we weren't getting any complaints from them. So Matt, just back to you. I'm just quite intrigued. Just could you give us some background of, because I think it's you and 2 other directors, isn't it, who run the business?
Yes. So it started back in, well, the idea came about in 2009. This was just in the run up to Christmas, and we have sort of big family Christmas. And it was me and my brother were staying, sort of visiting family during the day, and then returning to a cold house afterwards. And the idea was, this is ridiculous. This is when smartphones had just sort of taken hold. So you had the early versions of the iPhones and the Androids. I'm like, there's got to be a better way of controlling the heating than this. Because you could either, again, you could leave it on all day, which we didn't want to do, or you could set a timer, but it was different every day, so you didn't really want to do that. So we should be able to do this via your phone. So we did a quick bit of Googling, like you do, and we found there were a few systems out there, but they were really, really expensive, like sort of £500 plus. And this is, again, back in 2009 days, so equivalent now would be a lot more. And I had a background in IT. I've previously worked for sort of research in universities. And my brother, Gavin, has a background in electronics. He's sort of working in medical electronics, so quite high-end life or death type things. So we had a very good mix there, thinking we've got most of the skills required to develop our own system. So the first idea was, we'll just have a go at doing this for ourselves as a project. It'd be something fun. And it kind of developed on from that, really. We very quickly realized that not only could we do something much cheaper than what was already out there, but we could do it we could take this one step further and produce a final product, which would also be much cheaper than what was out there. And we felt better as well, because, well, partly we decided how we wanted it to be, so to do everything we needed. But we felt that the software out there wasn't great either. So we felt we could do something cheaper and better, and that was kind of where it started. What perhaps skills we'd lacked at the time was the sort of mechanical engineering, the design, the actual product design. So we initially used just a contractor to help us with a product based on our ideas. But it became very apparent that not having those skills in-house was going to slow us down and become quite a hindrance. So that was when our third director, we found Stuart, who was a colleague of Gavin's that were going back a few previous jobs, I believe, who just kept in contact with. And so we approached him to the idea of him coming on board, working with us, and getting the design of the products up to the same standard as the software and the electronics inside. So now we have what we feel is a much nicer looking products, much more reliable, and everything works really well now, we feel.
Good. So you alluded that you do other things other than just HMOs. When did it, I I guess, become apparent to you guys that HMOs was a very obvious market for your product, given that the control element can rest with the end user being the landlord rather than the tenant?
Yeah, that came about very quickly after we launched it. It's probably been 6 months. We had so many landlords contacting us, just saying, yeah, can you make it do this as well? Which was essentially, they was explaining the situation, saying, yeah, the heating's on all the time. How do I stop the tenants? If you can make it do this, it would be so much better for us. And you always get customers asking you for more features, and that's the nature of what we do. But the amount of landlords asking us for these specific features, it was like, yeah, this is going to be big. This is something worth doing. So yeah, we essentially we picked a couple, we spoke to them, we got a sort of list of requirements, we worked with them to sort of develop it, and when they found they were happy with it, we launched it, which was probably about 9 months, I think, after we first launched the initial product. We had the variant for the landlord with the extra sort of ability to restrict the actual functionality of the thermostat.
So when was that, Matt? If you had the idea in 2000, so when was it? 2010 you launched?
No, the idea was 2009. It took us a good 2 years. So I think it was October 2012. I think we launched our first version, and then the landlord version, I think, followed in. It must have been summer 2013. So probably sort of June, July 2013, I think.
Right. Okay. Good. So because I know you guys do a lot of different products, you're always innovating and inventing and those sort of things. But in terms of if you're someone who's setting up an HMO, in terms of your basic thermostat, which controls the timer on the boiler, what is involved in installing one of these systems? Because it's fairly simple. It's a fairly straightforward process to do, isn't it?
Yes, it's fairly straightforward. As with a lot of things, it depends. If it's a complete refurbishment and you're replacing the whole heating system as well, you need to install a heating system first, and then our controller would connect to the boiler or wiring center, depending upon what heating system you put in place. If you've got an existing heating system, so you're not changing the heating, but the boiler's fine, it would typically be a case of remove the old controller and put ours in its place. There may be some caveats based on wiring and whether they've got the correct wiring in place, but this is where we have a fully wireless system to sort of get around that. So there's always options. From an installation point of view, typically we would say it's about an hour for an installer. This can obviously vary depending on what they find at the property. Obviously, if it's an existing property, the installer's never been there, he's not sure what he's going to find. He may find everything works great, and it's just a case of take the old thermostat off. You will find usually 3 or 4 wires. You put those in our system, and you're virtually done. Other times they may find they turn up at the property and there's some more sort of custom system which they haven't seen before, and they need to sort of start hunting down user manuals and finding out how it works before we switch it over. So often it's quite straightforward, but not 100% of the time.
So there's the option of buying one of these thermostats from you guys, which is sent to site, and this is what I do. So it's sent to site, and then my builder or the electricians install it at the refurb stage. Do you guys offer a service of installation, or is it up to the end user?
We don't offer installation. It's up to the end user. Typically, we find a lot of, again, with landlords, they have their own electricians, which they use. They're sort of tried and trusted partners for converting their HMOs. So usually they're quite happy to sort of carry on and use those for it. We do have a list of installers of people who have installed our product. So you can, it's like a map on our installation page on our website with a map of all the installers located. So these are people who have installed our system, they're familiar with them. So obviously you're welcome to use them just to help if you need to find your own installer.
Yeah, and certainly from my experience, I mean, I've used the same developer on the last 3 or 4 projects I've done. And I think on the first one, they needed a bit of support, but you guys are always on the end of the phone there. and available for any support, not just from an installation point of view, but also from a user perspective in terms of getting it up and running on the app, and just the getting used to it and how to set a heating and hot water pattern and those sort of things. So I think I've even spoken to one of your guys who was happy to talk after hours or even on the weekend, because I needed to go to the property on a Saturday, in fact, and the individual said it's fine, call me on a Saturday, and I had their mobile number, which is great, just to have that flexibility. And then I was there, and we're very quickly able to address the particular issue we have. You guys have got a great reputation in the HMO marketplace. How many, you don't need to be specific, but Matt, roughly how many HMOs have you got systems installed in?
Yeah, I don't have the exact number, but we're sort of well into 5 figures on that sort of count. So yeah, I should give you a good approximation. And yes, customer service, that's paramount to what we do. Obviously, we prefer contact during office hours, but if you're outside of office hours, then you just talk to us in advance, schedule something, and we can be there for you.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So if we're talking 5 figures, the system, and from my own experience, it's very much worked for us. But what would you say? So if somebody is thinking about setting up an HMO, they're thinking about systems, particularly putting in one of your systems, there'd be an initial investment involved in purchasing that system, which we can come to in a moment. But could you just give us some idea, Matt, in terms of the likely cost savings, or if you prefer, maybe the risk management that you're kind of buying in terms of stopping bills from escalating? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a number of sort of savings you can make, obviously on the heating side of things. Typically, we would say, again, the actual savings are going to vary tremendously depending upon the HMO, how big it is, the size of it, how many rooms. That will all have quite a big effect on it. We don't tend to sort of say you'll save this amount, but we do ask our customers quite regularly just how much their savings are, and obviously they vary. The highest we get is in excess of £500, but these are larger. These could be like 10, 12 bedroom HMOs. Typically, we would say it will pay for itself within a year, or approximately a year, which covers the majority of people there.
Yeah, that would ring true. So my properties are all 6-bed HMOs, and I guess I should have a better grasp of what the gas costs are. I'm gonna stick my head out and say, let's say they're the gas costs are £1,000, give or take. I would say a 20% saving on that would not be, providing you're using the system properly, setting it, and just monitoring it as much as you can. And that's definitely not an unreasonable estimate of what it could save. What are we, just as and I know it obviously depends on the property and the situation, what the customer wants, but what would be the cost of a very basic system, Matt?
So the cheapest one we have for landlords is at 195, and then just probably about, like I said, about an hour of installer's time just to get it set up. So that would be a standard thermostat, which would a fully wired thermostat, which is a typical thing you would find in your own home, probably. So one thermostat controls the whole heating for the entire property.
Okay, so that £200 saving, an investment of that level would lend itself to a return on investment. Approximately, every situation's different, but in around a year. And frankly, even if it was 2 years, an HMO is a long-term investment, and it's just an invaluable asset in just helping us control the heating costs, control the hot water costs, but also good for the environment. Just in this day and age, just not having your system blasting away all day when there's no one in the property. So is there anything we need to, if we're like a lot of people tuning into this podcast, they may be about to undertake an HMO development. They could be in the realms of developing an HMO, or maybe they've done a number of them already, but they're thinking just of energy costs and controlling energy costs. What can you tell us, or tell anybody tuned into this podcast, what kind of things should we take into consideration when we're doing an HMO development that will help us manage energy costs going forward? Now, this, of course, can be with them potentially putting one of your systems in mind, but also apart from your systems, just some general advice of things that can be taken into consideration at the refurb stage of an HMO, Matt, would be very useful.
Yeah, so you've got the obvious things like insulation and double glazing. Obviously, make sure you've got that all sorted out. The sort of standard things which you'll find on your EPC. If you look at when you get the EPC rating, you'll have a list of recommendations of things to do to save on energy, and obviously pay attention to those where it's cost effective to do so. Some of them on there may suggest you can save £50 a year by installing a water heater, which is going to cost you £5,000, and that's probably not worth doing. But other things on there will be very good recommendations, and you can, like, obviously LED light bulbs all round, great savings on those, especially compared with incandescent ones. But if you compare them with the older energy saving bulbs, they are so much more user friendly. I think now they light up straight away, and obviously they use less energy as well. So lots of little things. Pay attention to the EPC. I think there's some good information on there. With regards to heating and saving, sort of bringing down the heating costs, there are a few other things you can do, and this depends a lot on the size of a property. If you are going for a larger property, you might want to consider sort of a zoned heating system. So a standard heating system you'd probably find in your own home, or smaller properties, you turn your thermostat on, all the radiators come on in the entire house and warms up the whole property. If you zone the heating, you divide your house into smaller zones, smaller areas, and you'll control each zone independently. So, for example, you could have upstairs and downstairs separated, and then they come on at different times, different, or your sort of living areas and social areas. So your lounge on a separate heating system to the bedrooms, for example. So all the bedrooms, you might want a slightly different temperature to the lounge, and then you can do that with a zone system. Where it typically comes into, and this has become a lot more apparent recently with a lot more people working from home, is if you zone each individual room. So each individual room can be controlled from its own separate thermostat or controller. Then whenever a room is empty, heating can be off. If you got sort of a void period, you don't want to be heating that room. If you've got a tenant working nights and some working during the day, you can with the zone heating system, obviously it can only heat. You can set it so it only heats the rooms which are occupied. So when the person working nights has gone to work, his room's off during when he's at work, and he might want his heating on at sort of, I don't know, 4 in the morning, whereas those who are working a 9 till 5 shift probably wouldn't want it on until a lot later. So you can really take your heating control of it down to the sort of nth degree, and it will not only provide better comfort for the tenants, but it will actually provide even greater savings than what you're currently already getting. The downside of this is it needs to be done at the installation phase. So if you are installing and want to go down this route, then ideally just contact us, book a free consultation. We'll talk you through the options. And if you go with it, great. If not, you might want to consider it for a future project. But yeah, if you got the larger a property, the more useful a zoned heating system will be, and the greater the savings.
That's really interesting, Matt, because even with one of your systems installed, we mentioned earlier that the tenants can turn the heating on, or they can ask us to turn the heating on. But the point is, for any of my properties, and I don't have a zonal system set up in any of them, but for the future ones, I'm definitely going to consider this, because when you turn the heating on, it comes on in the whole house, or it doesn't come on at all. And any zonal control, and there is zonal control, but that zonal control is on the radiator in the room. So it needs to be manually controlled. And half the time the tenants don't even know how to control the thermostatic valve, and they're calling us saying, oh, the heating's on and it's really hot in my room, what do I do? And you have to instruct them to turn it down. Or it might be cold in their room, and that's because it's been turned down, but no one's turned it up again. So that's always been in place. But the absolute beauty of what you're describing is that control can be done remotely. So if a tenant is at home, the heating can come on in a room or in a zone of the house that includes that room. So that's a really, really important point in just having even further control over gas central heating costs. Is it fairly straightforward to put some zonal control in at the refurb stage from I guess it's the plumber undertaking the work? Is it quite a straightforward thing to do?
Yes, it's obviously it's a bit more complex than if you were doing a standard heating system. But essentially, rather than with your pipe work at the moment, it would go from one radiator to the next and sort of loop through them all and then go back to your boiler. If you had a zone system, you would have separate pipes to each radiator and then back to a sort of control area. So it's a little bit more complex. It's not too much more, but as you're laying all the pipes, it needs to be done when you've got access to lay the pipes. So you need to have all the floors up and things like that. So it's definitely a refurb job and not so much of a retrofit option.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. It's not the kind of thing you would want to do your refurb and then someone mentions it to you and you think, oh, I wish I had known that before. So definitely something you want to do at that stage. And I guess any good plumber or builder with a little bit of consultation and some help with you guys is going to be competent in setting that kind of thing up. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if they've done it before, they'll have no problem at all. If not, they can just welcome to call us and we can just go through briefly what's involved. It's as long as you know what you're doing, it's fairly straightforward. You'll learn pretty quick if you haven't done it before. But yes, it's certainly something for larger properties well worth considering. And the other thing we can also add in, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that we have like a motion sensor. So this works great again with zonal properties. So if you have a motion sensor in the room, if they've gone out for the day, the motion sensor will detect no movement and can automatically turn the heating down.
Wow. Okay. So you probably, because the next question I've got for you, and some of it may already have been at least partly answered. So you guys are supplying systems to a number of HMOs in 5 figures as an estimate. What are your plans for the future? What have you guys got in the pipeline? Because, obviously, energy is a developing thing, and people are always looking for ways of conservation and managing bills and these sort of things. There's going to be all sorts of, I guess, green targets coming into play. What are your plans for the future? Yeah,
so there's quite a lot of things which we're developing at the moment. We've recently launched a new wireless receiver. So this is for our wireless system. Two parts to it. There's a thermostat, which the tenant controls and presses the buttons and measures the temperature, and then there's a receiver which the thermostat communicates, and then that talks to the boiler. So we recently sort of redeveloped that, and this not only sort of changing the look and feel, but it gives us more options moving forward, partly to better support zoned heating systems. So there's a few more development options we got on that, which will help us launch a few more models and variants. Primarily for the zoned heating side of things, but it will potentially also work with electric radiators. And there's some work we're working in discussion with various electric radiator manufacturers at the moment, because there seems to be in recent times there's talk about gas being removed from certain sort of going forward. Electric is becoming more of a hot topic nowadays, especially in some sort of small flats new build properties, which tend to then be serviced accommodations, they tend to find electric heating more often. So again, we're working with some radiator manufacturers to hopefully develop that a lot more and provide our full sort of landlord suite. But if you got electric, so that is ongoing at the moment. Hopefully that will progress throughout the year. And then more recently, we've just updated our website, and we're going to be going through all of our phone apps and sort of account management within the website. And for that, we will be ideally working with our existing customers. I think there's going to be a Facebook group which we're going to be inviting people along to, so they can see the apps in development and make suggestions as for work's taking place, rather than having more of a sort of, this is the new app, go and use it. We can say this is the new app, help us develop it. So we're quite looking forward to working with people on that, and getting that going. Other than that, there's always ideas. I think one of the things which has been mentioned quite a bit is measuring sound. So if you've got if you've got tenants creating too much noise, you can just set thresholds and they can just sort of alert you if there's constant noise at a certain time of the day, which some people have been sort of saying it'd be really nice if we can have this. Sorry, I forgot to silence my phone. Sorry about that. Do you want me to redo that bit, or?
No, that's completely fine, Matt. So yeah, no, that's all very interesting. Just jumping into, just picking up on something that you said about electric radiators. So this is something, because obviously the systems that we've been talking about, it's all gas-based, connecting to the gas boiler and ultimately determining when the gas boiler turns on and off, because that allows you to control the cost. But electricity is going to be used more and more, and gas is going to be used less and less, without question, going forward. And in fact, one of the projects we did explore having an electric system with an air source heat pump, but the expense, even with all the benefits, was so prohibitive. And then the company I was talking to couldn't even give me any type of assurance that it was going to be fail safe and that everybody was going to be able to keep warm when they wanted to. And my feeling was it was just a little bit too early, and we defaulted to good old gas boiler. But in 5 years' time, that might be very, very different indeed. So yeah, I think it's great that you guys are looking at all of that, because I think in 10 years, gas might even be, not even a topic of conversation. And I think electricity does give us by default more control, doesn't it? But it's just right now running on electric without the support of any sort of air source heat pump or ground source heat pump. I think that the cost, am I right in thinking that is about 4 times on an electric system?
Yes, so electric is a lot more expensive to run. I think it is around about 4 times. However, if you go with the air source heat pump, as you suggested, that is then around 4 times cheaper. So it puts it more comparable cost with gas, but you've got the higher installation cost, and you've got potential issues with it if it gets really, really cold. It loses its efficiency, so it wouldn't be 4 times cheaper. It would be then pushing the price up. You have got other ones. You can also look at ground source heat pumps, where it sucks heat out of the ground. They tend to be cheaper to run, but a lot more expensive to install. So again, there's lots of pros and cons against all of them. But yes, it's something which at the moment we've got gas, and that's great. Use that. It's the cheapest way. But again, if that becomes less available, then yeah, the ground source and air source of things we'll probably have to start looking at. And again, hopefully they'll develop and become more user friendly, more useful. And yeah.
Well, I have absolutely no doubt, Matt, that you guys will keep up with all of that and devise and alter and change, so that you're constantly keeping on top of that, and just being able to add value to landlords and help them with that whole energy management cost piece. I wanted to ask you, Matt, just for anybody who's running an HMO who might not be ready or to engage any type of system other than what's in the property at the moment. I was just going to ask you a couple of questions, things that I always used to kind of ask myself and try and find the answer out. One is it better, if you've got a heating system, is it better for it to be blasting on for a number of hours, then coming off and then blasting on? Or is it better to have it running constantly at a much lower level throughout a 24-hour period? Because I'm sure if I ask 10 people that question, I'm probably going to get 10 different answers. So yeah, over to you, Matt, because I'd be keen to hear it from an expert.
Yes, you will get 10 different answers. Primarily, I think, because there are actually probably 10 different answers to this question. A lot of it, again, it depends on the property. Every house is different, and even little things like the direction the house is facing. If it's south facing, you'll get more sun coming through, it'll keep the property warmer. Therefore, it's slightly warmer during the day. If it's north facing and not getting any sun, it's going to be colder. So you might want the heating on all day. You've also got the fact that some people will feel warmer than others. Some people are more active, running about, and they want the house a bit cooler. So they don't want the heating on all day. So there's lots of things like that. We find typically, I would say, heating on mornings and evenings. So on for a set period of time and then off and then on again. But again, that also depends on other factors like the size of the radiators. If you've got sort of large radiators, they'll warm up the room a lot quicker, and you'll tend to feel more comfortable based on doing that. If you've got small radiators and it takes like 3-4 hours to warm up the room, you probably wouldn't want to turn your heating off because it would because of the time taken. But this is where it gets complex, because if you've got the smaller radiators and you leave the heating on all the time, that might, if you small radiators and you turn the heating on just in the evening, it might use up less heating, less energy, just because it can't produce enough heat. So you're using less, but you're actually colder. So that's why it's sort of saving you money. One thing which I'd probably say, which is from my sort of phrase, which I've sort of come to use throughout the business, is essentially test and measure, which is what we do with a website and our phone apps and everything. Which is just try one, find a comparable sort of months, try 1 month with it on low all the time, 1 month on with it on mornings and evenings, and just see how it affects your house. Might be different. The difference will probably be fairly minimal, but you might find a noticeable difference, and you might find that's a better way forward for your property.
That sounds like good advice. Test and measure is always a good one. That's very helpful, Matt. And the other question I wanted to ask you, maybe a slightly easier one, is if you've pulled your thermostat out of the box and you're either going to put it somewhere yourself or give it to your builder, where is the best position in the property for the thermostat? Now, this is applied to whether it's a conventional old-fashioned system or even a thermostat from you guys. It needs to be positioned somewhere, doesn't it, in the property? So where's ultimately the best place to put it? So there's two real main options here. One is in a sort of hallway, or one is in a sort of lounge, sort of fairly. They're the two most common areas. The key things is it wants to be a sensible height, which is usually about 1 to 1.5 meters high. It wants to be away from sources of heat, so don't put it above a radiator. And make sure the sun doesn't come through a window and hit it at, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that will just send the temperature going really high as the sun warms up the thermostat. And the final thing is to avoid drafts. So if you put it near the front door, whenever the front door's open, when people come in with shopping or something, the temperature on the thermostat will plummet. So you ideally want to avoid that where possible. The room it wants to be in wants to be fairly representative of the whole house if you're in a typical sort of non-zoned system. So if when your lounge is up to 20 degrees, the rest of your house is at 20 degrees, then that's probably a good spot for it. If you put it in the hallway doesn't have much heating in it, and the radiators and the temperature in that room only goes up to say 18 degrees, and when that's 18, the rest of the house is 23, 24, that's possibly not the best spot for it. So you want a room which is, when this room is at
is at 20 degrees. The majority of the rest of the house is also at a similar temperature. And that's so we'd usually say, it's often in one of the living areas or hallway are the two most common places to put them.
That's a very good common sense answer, Matt, and makes absolute sense. And I hope that's of use to anybody listening to this, because that in itself can make a difference, can't it? In terms of just keeping some control and not having the boiler firing up unnecessarily. Matt, it's been great having you. It's been very informative, and I think we perhaps maybe better get you on again in a few years' time, just to keep us updated with everything you guys are doing. And that would be useful exercise.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's been great talking to you. And anytime, I'm happy to come back. Awesome.
Thank you very much, everybody. For more podcasts relating to all things HMO, do subscribe to our YouTube channel or check out our website, hmomatters.co.uk.